In the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, the lines between ambition and morality blur easily, leading to dangerous consequences. One such affair between a rising starlet and a famous director led not only to a dramatic rise in her career, but also to a deadly twist. Today we delve into a captivating case from 2010, where secrets, blackmail, and a desperate crime came to light. Emily Jones had always been driven by her passion for acting. Growing up in a small town in Idaho, she was the kind of girl who spent her free time performing in local theater productions, dreaming of a life far beyond the quiet streets of her hometown. Her parents, both hard-working but modest, didn't have the means to support her Hollywood aspirations, but they encouraged her. At 24, she packed her bags, left everything behind, and moved to Los Angeles in 2008, determined to make her dream a reality. In the beginning, Hollywood was overwhelming. The city, with its sprawling neighborhoods and flashing lights, was nothing like the simplicity of Idaho. Emily struggled for the first year. She auditioned for commercials, small roles, and even background parts in indie films, but nothing substantial came her way. She juggled multiple jobs, working as a waitress by day and attending acting classes by night. Her determination kept her going, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the industry was more about who you knew rather than how talented you were. Then came David Harrington. He was everything she had imagined a famous director would be: charming, influential, and deeply respected in the industry. David, who was in his mid-50s, had built a reputation for producing blockbuster hits that often swept through award seasons. He was revered for his creative vision, but rumors surrounded his personal life. People whispered about the young actresses who caught his attention, but no one had ever come forward to speak against him. To Emily, it seemed like nothing more than gossip, until he noticed her. David saw something in Emily during a small industry event in late 2009. She was still relatively unknown, but her natural beauty and eagerness to succeed drew him in. When David approached her with the promise of a leading role in his next major film, Emily couldn't believe her luck. He spoke about her potential, how he could make her the next big star, and for someone like Emily, hungry for a breakthrough, it was an offer she couldn't ignore. But there was a condition, one Emily never anticipated. David made it clear that her career wouldn't take off unless she agreed to his advances. At 24, Emily was naive and vulnerable. The pressure of the industry, her rising debt, and the fear of returning to Idaho, a failure, all weighed heavily on her. She convinced herself that this was just how Hollywood worked, that sometimes you had to compromise to get ahead. She gave in. After that night, everything changed for Emily. David delivered on his promise. She landed the lead role in his next film. And within a year, her name was everywhere. Awards ceremonies, red carpets, and high-profile interviews became a regular part of her life. She was invited to the most exclusive parties, rubbing shoulders with the elite of Hollywood. Emily had become the star she always dreamed of being, but the success came at a price. What no one knew was that David had secretly filmed their intimate encounters. He used these videos to control her, blackmailing her into continuing the affair. The once powerful and confident Emily began to live in fear. She couldn't tell anyone, not even her husband, Michael, whom she had married in 2011. Michael was a wealthy real estate developer, and they seemed like the perfect couple in the public eye. Behind the smiles and public appearances, Emily was trapped in a nightmare. David's control over Emily became more intense as the years went on. He would threaten to release the tapes if she ever tried to leave him or reveal the truth. Emily felt powerless, and the strain of living a double life began to take a toll on her mental and emotional health. Every time she looked at Michael, guilt consumed her, but she couldn't bear the thought of him finding out. She believed he would leave her if he knew the truth. By late 2012, Emily was spiraling. Her success in Hollywood couldn't mask the torment she felt inside. She began to withdraw from public life, skipping events and turning down roles. Her once flourishing career began to stall, and the rumors about her absence from the spotlight began to circulate. But the worst part was the constant fear that David would ruin everything. On the morning of March 5th, 2013, police were called to David Harrington's home after a neighbor reported hearing loud shouting and what sounded like a struggle. When officers arrived, they found David's body in the living room, his head bashed in with a heavy sculpture from his own home. Emily was sitting on the floor, trembling, with bruises on her arms and a bloody gash on her forehead. Everything started when Emily finally broke down. In December 2012, she couldn't keep it inside any longer and decided to confess everything to Michael. She told him about the affair, the blackmail, and the videos. It was the hardest conversation she had ever had. Michael, shocked by the revelation, didn't react in anger. Instead, he supported her, urging her to go to the authorities. He understood that she had been manipulated, but Emily was terrified. She feared that going public would not only destroy her career, but also expose her personal shame to the world. The Hollywood press would devour her, and her marriage would be under constant scrutiny. Emily couldn't stand the idea of losing control of her life. She had already lost so much to David's manipulation, and now the thought of her private pain becoming tabloid fodder was unbearable. After many sleepless nights and months of planning, Emily made a decision. She would confront David one last time and end it all. On March 4th, 2013, Emily drove to David's secluded beach house. This was the place where they had met in secret for years, away from the eyes of the public. It was isolated, with no neighbors nearby to witness what would unfold. She knew David wouldn't expect her to stand up to him. As she drove along the winding coastal roads, her mind raced with fear and anticipation. She had to make sure everything went as planned. That evening, she arrived at the house just before sunset. The tension between them was palpable. David greeted her with his usual smug confidence, thinking that their meeting would go as it always had. But this time, Emily was different. She had rehearsed in her mind what she would do, and this wasn't going to be another submission to his control. The argument that ensued was intense. David, sensing that Emily was trying to break free from him, became furious. He threatened her again, reminding her of the tapes and the power he held over her career and life. Emily, however, had come prepared. As the confrontation escalated, she saw no other way out. In the heat of the moment, Emily grabbed a heavy sculpture from the living room, a gift David had once bragged about, and struck him. David fell to the ground, blood pooling around him. When the adrenaline wore off, Emily was left standing over David's lifeless body, breathing heavily, her hands trembling. She didn't feel victorious. Instead, a cold numbness washed over her. The nightmare was finally over, but at a cost. she could never have imagined. The next morning, March 5th, 2013, when the police arrived at the scene, they found Emily sitting quietly on the floor, bruised and shaken. She told them that David had attacked her and that she had acted in self-defense. It was a believable story, given David's reputation, and the evidence seemed to support her claim. Emily was arrested, but released on bail after her initial hearing. The media exploded with the news of David Harrington's death. Reporters dug into his past, and slowly, the stories of his manipulation and predatory behavior began to surface. Other actresses came forward, but none had suffered as much as Emily. As Emily awaited trial, she knew her life would never be the same. But for the first time in years, she felt a sense of relief. The man who had controlled her for so long was gone, and the truth was finally coming to light. On March 7th, 2013, detectives started interviewing David's close associates, friends, and co-workers. Many of them spoke about David's troubling behavior, especially toward younger actresses. One colleague recalled overhearing conversations where David had boasted about his influence over certain women in the industry. Another mentioned how David often invited actresses to his beach house, promising them career-boosting roles in exchange for favors. As the investigation progressed, these testimonies painted a grim picture of David's private life. The team also gathered witness accounts of Emily's rise to fame under David's direction. Her rapid success, though undeniable in talent, was frequently whispered about behind closed doors in Hollywood circles. The investigators didn't stop there. On March 8th, 2013, they brought Emily in for further questioning. By now, they were starting to view the case with a more critical lens. Emily sat calmly, as she had rehearsed her story several times. She maintained that the events of that night were purely self-defense, but the detectives began noticing gaps in her timeline. When asked about certain details, Emily hesitated. Her account of the moments leading up to the struggle seemed rehearsed, and although she claimed to have acted in panic, there was a calculated tone to her responses that raised suspicions. The detectives dug deeper into her story, piecing together more evidence. One major inconsistency that stood out was the condition of the room. For a struggle that had supposedly been spontaneous, the crime scene appeared unusually neat. While David's body was clearly the result of a violent encounter, there were no signs of a larger altercation. No overturned furniture, no broken glass, nothing that suggested a chaotic fight for survival. The investigators began to wonder, had Emily been planning this all along? Over the following days, more of David's past victims came forward. A former actress, now in her late 30s, spoke out about how David had manipulated and threatened her in the same way he had with Emily. She had refused to comply with his demands years ago, and her career had suffered for it. Her testimony added weight to Emily's claims of blackmail, strengthening the argument that David had been preying on women in the industry for decades. The more the detectives uncovered, the clearer David's dark side became. But they were also starting to see that Emily may not have been as innocent as she initially seemed. On March 15th, 2013, the police obtained a key piece of evidence: security footage from a nearby property. The footage showed Emily arriving at David's beach house much earlier than she had claimed. This revelation contradicted her story that she had come over that night in a moment of desperation. Instead, it seemed she had planned the visit hours in advance. This discovery raised serious doubts about whether the incident had truly been in self-defense, or whether Emily had orchestrated the entire scenario. By March 20th, 2013, enough evidence had been gathered to arrest Emily. The inconsistencies in her timeline, the testimony of other victims, and the security footage all contributed to her formal charge of voluntary manslaughter. While her legal team continued to argue that she had acted out of fear and desperation, the prosecution began building a case that painted a different picture, one where Emily had plotted to rid herself of David's control once and for all. The emotional link between Emily and David was undeniable. For years, she had been under his thumb, a prisoner of his manipulation, unable to break free. It was a toxic relationship built on power and fear. Emily had started as an ambitious young actress, willing to do whatever it took to succeed. But over time, David's hold on her had twisted her once bright dreams into a living nightmare. The affair, which had begun with coercion, had turned into a dark, secret battle of wills between them. By 2013, Emily's life had become unbearable. The constant fear of exposure, the endless blackmail, and the guilt of betraying her husband all weighed heavily on her. David, on the other hand, had thrived off the control he held over her and others like her. He was a man who believed his influence was untouchable, that no one would dare challenge him because of the power he wielded in Hollywood. This arrogance was ultimately his downfall. He underestimated Emily's desperation and the lengths she would go to escape him. The prosecution latched onto these emotional undercurrents, arguing that while David had indeed been a predator, Emily had premeditated his death as a way to finally free herself. They presented her actions as calculated, noting the precision with which she had covered her tracks, right down to staging the crime scene to make it appear as a struggle. By the time the trial date was set, Emily's story had captivated the public. Media outlets followed every development, with some viewing her as a victim of Hollywood's dark underbelly, and others seeing her as a woman who had taken justice into her own hands. But the emotional scars left by her relationship with David were undeniable. What had begun as a young actress chasing a dream had spiraled into a deadly game of power, manipulation, and revenge. The trial began on September 5th, 2013, at the Los Angeles Superior Court, and it immediately became one of the most highly publicized cases in Hollywood's history. The media called it the Hollywood scandal of the decade, and with good reason. The story of Emily Jones, a rising star who had been blackmailed and manipulated by one of the most powerful directors in the industry, captivated the public. People couldn't stop talking about the salacious details of her affair with David Harrington and the tragic consequences that followed. The trial wasn't just about a murder. It was about the dark side of Hollywood, a world where ambition, power, and control often collided. From the very first day, the courtroom was packed with reporters, fans, and curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to witness the downfall of a once celebrated director and the woman who had killed him. Emily sat quietly beside her defense team, looking a shadow of the glamorous actress she once was. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow from months of stress and sleepless nights. Her husband, Michael, sat by her side every day, offering silent support. His presence was a point of fascination for many, as rumors swirled about whether he truly forgave her or if their marriage was hanging by a thread. The prosecution wasted no time presenting David Harrington as a powerful man who had abused his influence for years. They brought forth testimonies from other women who had experienced similar treatment from David, women who, like Emily, had been promised fame in exchange for their silence and submission. One former actress, who had left the industry after refusing David's advances, described him as a predator who used his position to control vulnerable young women. The prosecution painted David as a manipulator who had pushed Emily to the brink, but they questioned whether her actions had been an act of desperation or a calculated decision to end his control once and for all. Emily's defense team worked tirelessly to show that she had been a victim of David's manipulation for years, trapped in a cycle of fear and abuse. They presented evidence of the blackmail, the secret tapes David had made without her knowledge, and the threats he had used to keep her under his thumb. Emily's legal team argued that while she had indeed killed David, it had been in self-defense. They emphasized the years of psychological torment she had endured, making it clear that this wasn't a simple case of murder, but one of survival. As the trial progressed, the emotional toll on Emily became more apparent. Her defense team revealed that in the months leading up to the killing, Emily had been suffering from severe anxiety, paranoia, and depression. Her once bright career had been overshadowed by the constant fear that David would release the tapes and destroy her life. She had confided in Michael in late 2012, telling him everything: the affair, the blackmail, and the fear that David would ruin them both. Michael's reaction had been calm and supportive, urging her to go to the police, but Emily had been too afraid. The public confession to her husband became a turning point in the trial, with many seeing it as proof of her honesty and desperation. Throughout the proceedings, Michael remained a pillar of strength for Emily. He attended every court session, sitting quietly beside her, never once wavering in his support. His presence played a crucial role in shaping public opinion. Despite the scandal, it became clear that Michael believed in Emily's innocence, that she had been a victim of David's predatory behavior, and that she had acted out of fear, not malice. The media began to portray Michael as the devoted husband, standing by his wife even in the darkest of times. On November 10, 2013, after nearly 2 months of testimony, the jury reached their verdict. The courtroom was silent as the foreman stood to deliver the decision. Emily was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, a lesser charge than the prosecution had pushed for. The jury had acknowledged the years of manipulation and blackmail that Emily had endured, but they couldn't ignore the inconsistencies in her story or the evidence that suggested premeditation. The sentence was 5 years in prison, a reduced term given the extenuating circumstances of the case. For Emily, the verdict was a mix of relief and sadness. She knew she would serve time, but the outcome could have been far worse. The public, too, was divided. Some believed she had gotten away with murder, while others saw her as a victim who had been forced to make an impossible choice. The case highlighted not just Emily's individual plight, but the broader issue of power dynamics in Hollywood. Many women in the industry began speaking out about their own experiences of coercion and manipulation by powerful men, sparking a conversation that would continue for years to come. Emily served her sentence quietly. She was released after 3 years in 2016 for good behavior. The time in prison had changed her. When she returned to Hollywood, she was no longer the bright-eyed actress with dreams of stardom. The scandal had forever altered her career. Roles became scarce, and the industry that had once welcomed her with open arms now regarded her with caution. Though she still had her supporters, the stain of the trial never fully faded from public memory. Despite everything, Michael remained by her side. Their marriage, once on the brink of collapse, had survived the ordeal. He had forgiven her long before the trial, understanding that she had been a victim of circumstances far beyond her control. Together, they decided to leave behind the glitz of Hollywood and start a quieter life, away from the relentless gaze of the public. For Emily, the years of manipulation and blackmail had taken a toll on her soul, leaving her with scars that would never fully heal. David Harrington had stolen her dignity, her sense of self, and nearly her freedom. But in the end, Emily had fought back, though her methods had been drastic. The public moved on to the next Hollywood scandal, but for Emily, the ordeal was a permanent chapter in her life. Her story was no longer just about an affair gone wrong. It was about survival, the abuse of power, and the high cost of freedom. Hollywood would remember Emily Jones not for the roles she had played on screen, but for the real-life drama that unfolded in the courtroom. A dark reminder of how fame and power could destroy lives. Though Emily was no longer the star she once dreamed of being, she had gained something far more important: a second chance at life, free from the man who had controlled her for so long. This takes me back to another case where a Christian wife's dirty secret affair with a neighbor's Muslim son ends in murder. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss out on our daily updates.